So, hello everybody. Welcome to the 7 Deadly Myths of MBA Recruiting Busted. Thanks so much for joining us bright and early on this Monday lunchtime or morning, wherever you are. We have a really cool conversation for you here today. And so far we have a nice intimate group. So I hope you guys will stick around to the end. I'm going to stay and answer whatever questions you have about the presentation or about MBA recruiting or really about anything at all towards the end. So there's only a few of you here, so all your questions will be answered. So as Ingrid mentioned, I am Angela Guido. I'm going to tell you about myself in a minute. I run Career Protocol, and our philosophy at Career Protocol is that work is supposed to be fun. So this is the context of everything we're going to be talking about today. So I think the interface of Zoom has changed a little bit since I made this slide, but this is one way for you guys to communicate with me during the session. We're going to do a poll in a little while, but I want to just check in and see, first of all, if any of you know who I am, if you've heard my voice before, if we've met in any place in this vast universe, raise your hand if that is true for you. If you click around in the participant window, you should see a little place where you can click the raise your hand button. And let me just see if anyone has heard me speak before. We're just going to test the raising your hand button. Although that wasn't a very good question because no one's raising their hand. So maybe, I don't know if you have never heard me speak before or if it's not working. Oh, there's one hand up. Okay, we got one hand. Excellent. All right. Okay, anyway, so let me tell you about myself since you guys are meeting me for the first time. So this is kind of my, my super short form resume. I consider myself more than anything a student of human nature and the journey to understand what it means to be human, what it means to be myself, and then to figure out how I can help people with these insights has passed through all of these touch points. So I was a language nerd growing up. I majored in philosophy. My first job out of business school was teaching. But the most important stop points on my journey for our purposes today are the fact that I have both been in your shoes. So I got my own MBA from Booth and I managed to get a full-time offer at BCG, which was a little bit of a miracle. You're going to understand that when I tell you more about my story in a minute. And then I've also been on the other side of the table. So I worked in recruiting at BCG for a couple of years before coming out on my own to be a career and MBA coach. So for about the last 10 years, my job has really exclusively focused on helping MBAs gain admission to schools and then get the jobs that they want. And I've worked with thousands and thousands of people over the last decade. So, my clients have gone to all of your favorite schools. This is just a, sampling. And then they've gotten jobs at all of your favorite companies. Likewise, this is just a small sample of brands you probably recognize. So here's what we're going to do today. I've got 4 big items. I want to talk about how to be happy at work. I think really understanding the dynamics of what makes you happy at work is the root of everything. You have to know what drives your satisfaction in order to be satisfied, in order to go after jobs that are actually going to make you happy. So we're going to start with that. Then I'm going to talk about how to avoid falling victim to the 7 deadly MBA recruiting myths. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about YOMO, and then I will take whatever questions you have. And what YOMO is will become clear as we go today. That's a really brief discussion. Okay, so let me tell you my career story because I think this will also help you understand the context of everything I'm going to share today. So I majored in philosophy, as I said, which means that basically I had not done any math since high school. By the time I got to business school, Excel and PowerPoint were total mysteries to me. My first job was playing Twister with a bunch of kids in South Korea. So I was an English teacher for a couple of years in my first job post-MBA. And then I ended up working in human resources, again, in a company in South Korea where I was living after college. And this was where I really connected with my passion for helping people find satisfaction at work. And so I believed at that time that work is life. For those of us who have what we call a career, it's not just a job, but we're actually building something, we're going somewhere with our work life, we're going to spend half or more of our waking hours working. So it's important, I think, that work be fun and enjoyable. It just seemed really obvious to me that it should be. But when I looked around at all of my friends and even colleagues, most people seemed, stressed out or like not very happy, or they were totally bored and checked out. Some people were in a much worse, totally freaked out at all times. And this just really seemed wrong to me, that so many talented people, and I was quite young at this time, I was very idealistic. So it just seemed really wrong to me that all of my friends and colleagues were miserable and spending so much of their lives being miserable. So I knew that it was possible for work to be fun. I just believed that it could be that way. So I thought it should be, because we only have one life to live. The world is your oyster. You have to do something that's meaningful and enjoyable to you. Otherwise, what's the point? So with that mission in mind, I went to business school. That was my platform for my essays. And that was what I went to Booth, on a mission to solve this problem of why people were unhappy at work. And I'll tell you why I ended up recruiting for consulting a little bit later in this presentation. But I basically did everything wrong in recruiting. So when you get to campus, you're going to have a presentation by career services. They're going to give you some advice. I'm going to give you a lot of that same advice today and even more. And they're going to tell you a lot of ways to ensure that you're able to get a job, and a job that you want. And I ignored pretty much all of their advice. And one of the things I ignored was casting a broad net and kind of balancing out my risk. I didn't do that. I really only targeted 3 firms for my summer internship. So for my summer, I ended up doing nothing. I did not get a summer internship in any of the firms that I wanted to work at. I was very fortunate to ultimately do a faculty research internship with a really great professor at Booth, who is still a friend to this day. That turned out to be a very meaningful experience. But I was one of the members of my class who pretty much failed to get a summer internship. That did not feel good, let me tell you. So that summer, I spent a lot of time, while people were, doing their, banking jobs in New York, and then, on a yacht in Croatia, I was working on myself and really trying to figure out what went wrong and how I could turn the boat around for full-time recruiting. And it worked. I ended up getting 2 offers for full-time, including these 2 companies, and I chose BCG. So that's where I ended up. And look, I went to business school with the notion that I was going to help more people be happier at work. And then there I was, really unhappy at work in my own job. So there are a lot of lessons that you can learn from my mistakes. I'm going to highlight them even more clearly as we go today. But I really failed to understand what motivated me and what made me happy at work. I hadn't done any work on that, and I ignored all of the signs. So I found myself in consulting. I loved the firm. I loved the people I was working with, but I wasn't happy in the consulting job. So, here's some things, actually here, let me just boil this down to you, boil this down for you into an equation. So this is the happy at work equation. And these are the things that you need to fully be fulfilled in your job. The first thing is that you need to be doing tasks that you enjoy. And you need to be working with people you love. So this is the day-to-day, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You want to be spending at least some and preferably most of your time on tasks that are actually enjoyable to you, and then surrounded by people you respect and like, and whose company uplifts you. And then over time, but that's not enough, right? It's not, because you have a career, you're building something over time. So it's not just how do you feel on Monday and Tuesday, it's really about year to year, what are you building? And so on that side, you need to be having a meaningful impact. We each have an area of life, an area of humanity that we care about a little bit more than others. This is just part of how we come into this world. We could talk about where it comes from. That would be an interesting conversation. But suffice it to say, you have the things that you really care about, and then the rest you don't care as much about. So ideally with your career, you're having an impact in areas that are actually meaningful to you. And in the process, you're growing substantially as a professional and as a person. So if you have all four of these things working on in your favor, you are going to be happy at work. If you're missing any one of these things, something is going to be a little bit off. So this was my situation at BCG. I was working with people I loved. I was growing exponentially every day. I learned so much at BCG as a consultant, much more even than I learned in my MBA. But I wasn't super jazzed about the tasks I was doing. Some of them I enjoyed, some of them I really didn't like very much. But where I really failed to understand myself was here. And this was what led me to switch from working as a consultant to working in recruiting and managing the women's initiative at BCG. Because what I learned about myself as a consultant is that for me, I really need to be having a direct impact on people's lives. And I need to be able to see it, and I need to be able to see the progress and the change that's happening in their lives. Without this, I'm fundamentally unfulfilled at work. And as interesting as our clients' problems were, and as challenging as the BCG consulting work was, I wasn't having enough of a meaningful impact directly on people's lives. And that was ultimately what caused me to be unhappy personally in that role. So this was something I couldn't have known until I tried that job. A lot of what you'll learn about being happy at work is stuff that you can only learn through experience. So part of what I'm going to be talking about today is how you can amass some experience and get to where you ultimately really want to be, even if the first step isn't precisely that. So how do you get all of this stuff? Well, look, here's one way. You can rub a magic lamp and make a genie wish. That's one way to get everything you need to be happy at work. And this isn't quite a myth, but let me just say, the MBA is not a magic lamp. It's not a genie. This was news to me, frankly. in business school, I really kind of thought that the MBA was going to magically turn me into someone who knew what she wanted and could go after it and was just like suddenly having a really great life without having to work at it. But let me tell you, the MBA is not this. It's a tool, but it doesn't grant any wish. So here's the answer. Here's the other way. All right. In the absence of a genie, being happy at work is really a skill set. And here are the 4 skills. You need to really understand yourself. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today ultimately boils down to a form of self-awareness. Then you need to make confident choices. You're confronted with career choices all the time, like almost every day. You are given the opportunity to make choices that affect your career in the short term and the long term. And so you want to really be able to make the right ones for you personally. You need to be able to communicate brilliantly. And this is essential because all of the substance of your future career is going to be based in communication. As you were applying to business school and in your pre-MBA career, for the most part, you were an individual contributor, and your hard skills, your ability to build spreadsheets and your ability to, engineer products, drove a lot of your success. But post-MBA, the more you become a leader and a manager, the less your hard skills are the basis of your success, and the more your soft skills are going to drive your longevity. So all of that comes down to communication and nurturing relationships. So these are kind of the core skills that ideally you're going to work to develop. Now, many of you have some of these basics down. The MBA is really your chance to up-level yourself in all of these arenas. And I really think you need to start with self-awareness. Everything flows from here. Knowing what you want is the first step to getting what you want. So you have to start with self-awareness. So that's going to be a bit of a focal point today, like I said. And this is just for the simple reason that the common element in all 4 of these components of being happy at work is you. No 2 people are going to have the exact same equation because we're all unique. We all have unique preferences. We all have unique things that we're curious and excited about. So your first step is really understanding you in the context of this equation. So let me actually quickly check in with you guys. I'm going to launch a poll here. So take a moment, everybody, and respond to this question, and just let me know where you are in your career. I know some of you are definitely starting your MBA in the next 6 months. Very exciting, but you could be in any number of different places. So everybody, please take a moment and just tell me where you're at. Okay. Good. Okay. So we got most of you are starting your MBAs in August or September. And then we got a couple people who are applying in the future or still waiting to hear their results. But this is helpful because most of what I'm going to say is most relevant to those of you who chose answer C and B. So if you're starting your MBA this fall or in the next year, this information is most relevant. For those of you who are applying in the future, this information is actually also still really important. But instead of thinking about this from the perspective of what can I do now to get ready for my MBA job search, you want to think about this in terms of what do I need to do now to get ready for my MBA application? Because really the task of self-awareness permeates every step. You're answering slightly different questions if you're in the process of applying to business school than if you've already gotten in and are seeking your internship. But effectively, the motion of self-awareness, the muscle is the same. So, okay, so here you are. You're embarking on a very exciting, challenging journey towards the next step of your career. And as you head off on that road, let's see if we can help you avoid, like I said, falling victim to some of the presumptions that certainly I had. So a lot, again, I'm a career coach for 12 years. I manage recruiting at BCG, but a lot of what I'm sharing tonight is based on my own failures and mistakes. So these are all mistakes I made, and I'm going to hopefully help you avoid as you encounter your MBA. So myth number one, I got into a great business school. My life is set. I'm so embarrassed to say that I had more or less exactly this thought as I was beginning my own MBA. And first of all, let me just say congratulations. So really, if you've gained admission to business school, that is absolutely worthy of celebration. And really, I'm also an admissions consultant, so I know what it takes to get into business school. So really, really congratulations. It's a major accomplishment. So do celebrate. Celebration is important. However, because the journey you took to get here was so long and arduous with the GMAT or the GRE, and then your applications and the essays and the interviews and the waiting and the rejection and the acceptance, it's very tempting to just kind of do this, from now until August or so when you relocate to campus. This is definitely what I did. In fact, do you guys recognize this city? Type something in the chat box if you know where this is. I think you guys have access to the chat box. Tell me if you recognize this city. But this is what I did with my summer. So as soon as I got into business school, yeah, very good. You got it. This is Florence. This is Florence, Italy. So I spent my summer before my MBA traipsing around Spain and Italy, and I moved to campus at the very last minute. I was still purchasing furniture during orientation. Not the best call in hindsight. You do want to enjoy your summer. I do recommend that you travel. I do recommend that you take a little time off, spend time with family, do the things that you haven't had the chance to do for the last few years and are definitely not going to have the chance to do for at least another couple years, because the MBA is a wild ride. You are going to be so busy in those 2 years. So take some time to enjoy it, but don't totally tune out of your ultimate goal, because you have to keep in mind that the MBA isn't really a destination. It's a stepping stone. It's a pathway to your next career step. And your next career step is ultimately the thing that really matters. It's going to be much more important in the long run than your MBA itself. So here's a little framework to understand how recruiting works. And this is not probably news to you. most companies, many companies, not all, I'm going to share some stats with you in a minute that demonstrate this a little more clearly, but some companies are hiring more than one person. A lot of them are only hiring one person. That's important to understand. So they're going to take the most qualified candidates from the pool of applicants that they like. If your qualifications are way off and a lot of your classmates have much better qualifications for the jobs you're applying for, then you might not even get invited to interview. And then the people who get invited to interview but don't ultimately convert to the offer, it's either because they were less qualified than enough other candidates that they didn't quite clear the bar, or it could be that they didn't like you. So one of the big takeaways of this slide for most people is the importance of likability. Likability is something that comes across in communication. So a lot of the tips I'm going to give you today and going forward, if you choose to download my little career game plan toolkit, are focused on cultivating likability with your network and with the recruiters that you network with. But the key point on this slide for our purposes is really just that you're entering a competitive process. And if you thought that getting into business school was competitive, oh boy. So look, this was you in your previous life. If you got into a great business program, then I can virtually guarantee that your life has looked something like this so far in your career. You were the poppy in a field of daisies. You stood out, you had an impact, you moved faster, you learned faster, people liked you, people supported you. You've had success so far, and probably you were at least somewhat exceptional in where you've been coming from. Well, guess what the MBA field looks like? Oh, it's a field of poppies. So you're about to be surrounded by a bunch of amazing people just like you. Those are your competitors. It's the most brutally competitive field you will ever be a part of. And I guarantee you at some point, you're going to completely lose your confidence. That's sort of like part of the game. You'll be able to regain it if you're taking all the right steps, but you want to prepare yourself for this mindset that things that have been easy for you so far in your career aren't necessarily going to be easy coming out of business school, because you're competing with a very elite group of people. So the challenges are still to come. Most people say that MBA recruiting, internship recruiting in particular, is far, far more grueling and soul crushing than the admissions, the MBA admissions process. So this isn't really it's meant to scare you a little bit. I'm trying to scare you a little bit, not because you should be afraid, but I'm trying to make you aware of how real this is and how quickly it's coming, so that you can prepare, so that you can have a great time. The whole point of this is to make work and your MBA fun. And if you know what's coming and you prepare yourself for it, you're going to be able to really enjoy all of it. So here's your best strategy. Take time off, do that, but lay some groundwork for your job search now. Don't just show up on campus and hope that everything is going to work out if you haven't done any work in advance. Okay, here's myth number 2. I have plenty of time to explore the options and take a break. Again, this is kind of what I thought. I thought, oh, I'll just, take the first year to think about what I want to do, and then I'll find the right job for me that's a perfect match for what I wrote in my essays. And I still remember exactly where I was sitting during the career services presentation, during orientation, before classes even started, when they struck the fear of God into us, explaining how challenging and competitive the recruiting environment is and how quickly things start. So this is the Harvard recruiting schedule. And those of you who know anything about Harvard, you may know that Harvard is one of the schools that keeps recruiters away. They don't allow recruiters to come on campus until 7 weeks into classes. So you basically have 7 weeks at Harvard to be a student before recruiting starts breathing very seriously down your neck. But the thing that should be a little bit less, there's a couple things that are problematic about even that. And that is, number one, that your resume, so every school compiles a book of all students' resumes and they send it to all the recruiters. And so this is like your official resume that's going to be the basis of whether or not you get invited to coffee chats and cocktail parties and potentially even a closed list at a company that you're interested in. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say closed list, the schools that recruit multiple candidates or even one candidate sometimes on campus, they come and do a day of interviews, but they're not going to interview everyone. They can't interview absolutely everyone. They're going to choose the people that they want to interview. And if you're not on the closed list, as it's called, if you're not on the interview list, there's still a chance that you might be able to interview with that firm, but then it becomes a little bit more complicated. So your first challenge really is getting on the closed list at the firms that you want to interview at. And why the resume book is an important date is because by the time you finalize your resume, you need to have made some big decisions about what goes on that resume. If you're recruiting for consulting, you're going to have the management consulting club. You're going to have bullets that highlight your strategic experiences, client management, and anything that's, relevant to the kind of consulting you want to go into. And if you're planning to go into finance, then you need to have the finance club on your resume, and you need to have bullets that highlight your analytical skills and your financial prowess. And importantly, you need to not have the management consulting club on your resume, because firms look to see, are you just throwing spaghetti at the wall, or do you have a sense of purpose about where you're headed? So you need to make some of these decisions within 6 weeks of arriving on campus. It's almost cruel. I mean, honestly, this was a huge shock to me when I got to campus. And by the way, some schools have way less than 6 weeks. Harvard is actually the longest window, especially the Chicago schools that are on the quarter system. So Booth, we started school a month later than Harvard, but we were on a similar recruiting schedule. So we had to deal with company presentations way earlier even than Harvard students did. And so you need to make some of these decisions about your resume pretty much like the first week. And then 7 weeks in, you're attending corporate presentations. And like I said, some schools start recruiting in week 1. So this was really a shock to me and most of my classmates. Recruiting starts right away. So you don't have a ton of time to explore, so to speak, to kind of question what you want to be doing. If you hope to get a summer internship, especially at one of the primary firms that recruits on a predictable timeline, then you need to figure some of this stuff out really before you get to campus. And because it's really important to remember that recruiting is really only a small part of your MBA life. You've got studying, you've got trips and treks and travel, you've got networking, you've got study groups and affiliation groups and clubs. You are probably never going to have more FOMO in your life than you will in the next 2 years during your MBA. So then that's fear of missing out for those of you who are not familiar with the term FOMO. So you really want to make some choices before you get to campus so that you're not staring like a deer in headlights at the recruiting machine. You have a plan. You kind of know more or less. You don't have to nail it completely, but you have a sense of the ballpark you're targeting. And you've begun to prepare for some of those communications, things like your resume, like how you introduce yourself to recruiters, your informational interviews, even potentially even beginning to prep for interviews to some extent. So now you have a little bit of time before you start, even if you're going to travel, even if you're going to work a few more months to lay some of the groundwork. So I really encourage you guys to do that. So here's another myth. Career services will help me figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Again, I made all of these mistakes. I kind of imagined that, career services was going to be like a personal career coach, and someone was going to sit down with me and listen to me and help me really explore and figure out what I wanted to do. And that's just not how it works. So career services, the staff of people that help you get a job, their metric is this. Okay. So They want to make sure that you graduate with a job or that you have a job 3 months out. But they're really just trying to help you avoid unemployment. If you end up in this kind of a situation where you're cramming yourself or getting crammed into a job that's not a perfect fit for you, that's not really their problem. Because not only would this be impossible for them to measure, they just don't have the resources to dedicate. And ultimately, it's your responsibility to figure out what you want to do. So this is the statistic that Career Services cares most about. This is the percentage of grads employed at graduation and 3 months out. So take a look at this chart, find your school on here, and you can see that some percentage of your classmates will not have found a job even 3 months post MBA. That's a little bit of a, doom and gloom. That's like a doomsday scenario to be 3 months out and still not have a job, but it does happen, and it will happen to some people. For some of those people, it's not a problem. They're taking their time, but for a lot of people, it's really kind of a disaster. So, and notice how, notice the differentials, how many people have a job at graduation versus later. You might be surprised to see how low, so these are obviously ranked from highest to lowest. You might be surprised to see how low on the list some of your top schools rank. This is a really important thing to keep in mind. There aren't really any guarantees here. You have to take responsibility for what you want. Here's another really grim statistic. 75% of students pursuing a function or industry shift at Booth. So this is just one of Booth's stats, but this is pretty common across the board. So you can extrapolate this number to your school. It may be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but roughly 3 out of every 4 of your classmates are looking to pursue some kind of a shift, to move industries or move functions. And the bad news is that employers are twice as likely to hire experienced MBAs over career switchers. So you kind of have your work cut out for you. And it's important to keep in touch with your vision. So if you had just wanted to stay in your current job, you wouldn't be going to business school. You're getting an MBA because you're trying to launch yourself into a much brighter, much bigger future. That's a big task. And the MBA itself isn't going to do it for you. You're going to have to take ownership of that change and really make it happen for yourself. Because ultimately, Career Services has every incentive to send you back to where you came from. It's much easier to place an accountant in a financial control role than it is to place an accountant in marketing. So if you're trying to make a change, that's really on you. And Career Services will support your goals, but they're not going to make it happen for you. And again, they just want to make sure you have a job, and this is the easiest place to send you. So you need to think of Career Services and all the staff and all the resources as a resource. So they're not responsible for you. They're just a tool to leverage. You can think of it as like a website or a library. There are people that are part of the system, but it's really just a resource for you to leverage. Most schools have little to no direct career coaching. In other words, the soul searching stuff, like the big questions and the tailored communication training, they just aren't staffed up for that. And many schools rely on student clubs and fellow students to drive recruiting preparation. So Kellogg, for example, has almost no centralized support for case interviews. You're going to do all your practice cases with your classmates. And for many people, that's enough. For some people, it's really not enough. So you really need to be thinking about driving the process. So if you want to make the most of what Career Services has to offer, you need to be in the driver's seat. So take responsibility now for figuring out what you really want, so that when you get to campus, you can go to Career Services and you have a specific ask. You know what you're going after. You can sit down and have a conversation with them, and then they can help you achieve that goal. Myth number 4. As an MBA, I can get any job I want. It will be like a job buffet and I can just take my pick. This particular myth wasn't mine, but it was certainly the belief of some of my classmates and many of my subsequent clients. It's just like brunch. I can just go take my pick of whatever job looks the best. And this is unfortunately really not true. Here's another way to think about it. You're trying to choose a door from among hundreds of possible doors. and you're going to have a lot of options. So this is one situation where having more options is not necessarily a good thing, because almost all of the options for jobs coming out of business school are wrong for you. There's only going to be a small handful of possible jobs that are actually going to be a good fit for your values and your interests and the kind of impact that you want to have. So having more options in this case is almost a bad thing, because you only live once. This is really the downside. This is the downside to living only once. And it's this: you can do anything. With an MBA and some ambition, you can really do anything, but you can't do everything. You have to choose. You have to choose just one post-MBA job. And look, it really matters which one you choose, because if you go through the green door, you're going to have one life. If you go through the pink door, you have a completely different life. And this decision is going to really stress you out, no matter how much you meditate or, control your own emotional stress. This is a stressful decision. So, and it's especially hard if you don't really know what's on the other side of the door. But that's basically what's going on here. Especially if you're a career switcher, you're going to be taking a job that is totally different from everything you know. It's very hard to understand whether or not you're going to like it. This is part of what happened to me. I thought consulting, it's a creative job, it's intellectually challenging. And those two things are really important to me. And that was what led me down that path. But once I got in the job, I realized, wait, this isn't the kind of creativity and intellectual challenge that I'm actually interested in. And I just didn't do the work to learn that before I walked through the door. So, it's really kind of, makes you feel like this. And, this is what a lot of MBAs feel. You're really crushed between YOLO and FOMO. So, and let's make things even worse. It's not even like this. It's not even like you're looking at 20 doors and you have to choose them all contemporaneously, because recruiting happens in stages. Banking and consulting come first. Then come the big tech companies and other financial organizations. Then come marketing, recruiting. They come in sequence, and you can only have one offer at a time. So there is a stated policy or rule. There's like an honor code among recruiting at your school that if you have an outstanding offer, it's really bad form to keep recruiting. You're going to have to turn down that offer, which comes with its own problems, if you want to keep recruiting for other companies, because otherwise you're taking jobs away from your classmates, and you don't want to do that. So you're going to have to make these decisions blind. You're not going to really be able to experience much before you have to make a decision. And, and then unemployment is waiting for you at the end of this corridor. And, you're going to feel like it's coming after you at some point. I'm giving you all the doom and gloom emotions, not to scare you. I'm doing it mostly so that when it happens to you, you don't freak out. I had this really great manager at BCG who was a former Navy SEAL, and he told us stories about how when he was in training, they would literally drown the trainees, so that when later they were on a mission and started drowning, they didn't panic because they had been through it before. So this is kind of what I'm doing here. I'm telling you all the things you can expect to feel, so that when you feel them, you can relax a little bit and not beat yourself up and not take it personally that you're stressed out. Because I promise you, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you and that you're not as good as your classmates. You'll be tempted to think that. But I promise you that this is completely normal. There's a lot at stake, and you have a lot to give the world. And of course, you want to make the most of it. And that's going to be stressful. But that's okay. You're going to get through it. And here's some more ways to lessen the stress. Really think about, what are the opportunities that your school facilitates? So we've kind of been talking a little bit about looking at yourself. So really understanding who you are and what you want. And the flip side of that is understanding what opportunities your school facilitates. So this is the number of jobs that graduates took. This is from the class of 2017 by industry. And the two schools that don't have data, it's because our data source wasn't available at the time we made this chart. So that, doesn't mean anything about those schools. But, you know, find your school on here and look and see, like, what on average are your classmates going to be going to do? Similarly, you can understand the same thing by function. So still, the majority of MBAs are going into consulting. Consulting is a really good option for most people. It's not for everyone, but it is a really good option for a lot of people for a reason that I'm going to explain in a minute. Okay, so you want to start to understand, like, what actual companies recruit at my school. These are the companies that recruit at the most top 30 MBA programs. Deloitte's number 1, CPWC is number 5, way above, Deloitte's way above McKinsey. So if you're planning to go into consulting, for example, you're probably thinking MBB, but the reality is you're more likely to end up at Deloitte or PwC. So think about this. What are the companies that you want to pursue, and do they recruit on your campus? And then understand if the companies you're most looking for aren't on campus, what do you need to do to create those opportunities for yourself? So here's some other facts. And this is just a small selection. So there were 929 students that graduated in the class of 2017 and 725 employers. So that's an average of 1.28 employees per company, which of course means that the mode is 1. Most of the companies that recruited that hired a Harvard alum only hired 1 person. What that likely means is that most of those people did an off-campus or networked job search. In other words, 725 companies did not parachute into the Harvard campus and conduct a bunch of coffee chats and a bunch of interviews and talk to, 40 or 50 people and then pick their favorite. That's not what they did, because that's not cost effective. If you're only going to hire 1 person, you're not going to make that huge investment of getting to know a lot of students and the whole campus. So that means that most of the people who graduated from Harvard in 2017 sourced their own job through some form of off-campus or networked activity. This might be you, especially if you want to go work for a small or medium-sized company, for a startup, for something in a niche industry, and not just those of you who are going to Harvard. Any school has a set of opportunities and it's limited. So especially if you think especially if you start to have a strong sense that you want to do something a bit unique and you don't want to go into consulting or banking or the jobs that recruit en masse from your school, you want to start preparing for that now, because it's going to take a lot more work on your part, because most of these companies don't even offer formal internships. In some cases, you're going to have to sell your own internship if you want to go work at a company that's not used to hiring MBAs. And again, many of them don't recruit on campus. So your strategy is to really get smart about what companies actually recruit at your school and eliminate some of those doors now, so that you're not looking at 1,000 options when you get to campus, or you're not looking at 725 options when you get to campus. You're looking at 10 or at most 20 or even fewer. Eliminate the things you can confidently eliminate, so that when you're considering the options during your MBA, it's not so overwhelming. Here's a really great way to do this, by the way. You may know that coming up May 9th and 10th in New York City is the Poets and Quants Pre-MBA Networking Festival. I strongly, strongly encourage all of you to attend this event, or at least consider attending this event. I have attended in years past, and not only is it a very fun and interesting event, you get to network with top MBAs from all different schools, but you also get to meet company representatives in their offices and ask them whatever questions you want to ask about their work, about how the recruiting process works. You get the chance to start building relationships now. So look in the chat box. If you guys can see the chat box, Ingrid just posted the link to the networking festival. So click over to that link and consider signing up for this event. It's also really reasonably priced. So if you can be in New York on these days, I strongly encourage you guys to go. It's going to help you lay the groundwork, not just for making some decisions, but also for networking, which is critically important. I'm going to say a little more about that here. And then in 2 weeks, I'm leading another webinar all about networking, all about how to build your network, how to make connections, how to do it the right, like non-douchey way. And that webinar is only available at this moment to pre-MBA participants. At least that's the current plan. So yeah, consider that event. Okay, myth number 5. I've been the best everywhere. I'll be the best here too. So, not everybody enters the MBA with a really high level of self-confidence, but far more people do than are representative in the average population. So at least some of you in this webinar, I'm sure, have kind of come through life pretty easily. Like you just excelled, you succeeded in everything that you did. But again, now you're going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of other people who have equally or greater skill sets and track records to yours. So try to put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes. And remember that a lot of companies are only hiring 1 or 2 or 3 MBAs. So if you put yourself in her shoes, she's not shopping for cheeseburgers. This is the flip side of the MBA buffet conversation. The recruiters aren't just coming to snap up whoever they find. Their hiring process is extremely expensive. The stakes are high because if they hire the wrong person, it's messy to get rid of them. And it's really a huge set of opportunity costs lost. And, it just damages their turnover and their morale. And ideally, whoever they're hiring is going to be sticking around for several years. So they're not looking for cheeseburgers. They're looking for like Tiffany rings or like a Ferrari, whatever metaphor you want to use. If you were buying a nice piece of jewelry or a sports car, you'd really want to know that you're getting the highest quality you can possibly get, because the thing is going to be in your life for years. It needs to fit, and you're going to see it every single day. So you really need to like it. This is why likability is so important, because they're hiring you and they're going to be, maybe not the hiring manager, but other representatives of the company are going to be seeing you every single day. So they need to feel like that's going to be a positive experience for them. So, it's easy to think of MBA recruiting as like McDonald's, from the recruiter's perspective, but it's really much more like Tiffany. They don't just pick one out of the pile. They're looking for their one perfect fit. So this has implications for your plan B. Okay. In other words, if you were hiring for your company, isn't that what you would want? Like you wouldn't just want any old MBA. You'd want the person who is interested in what you're doing, is passionate about the work, is really easy to hang out with, and will fit in really well with your culture. You'd be very, very discerning. You'd want the best. And our recruiting manager, of course, is no different. So, whereas in the past, again, you might have been able to differentiate yourself fairly easily. You were the one orange koi in the white koi pond. But MBA recruiting is much more like this. It's like, everybody is great. Everyone is talented. Everyone has experience. How are you going to differentiate yourself from this hungry field? And the answer has to do much less with your experience, your skills, your resume, and a lot more with how you build relationships. Because again, the choice to invest in you by hiring you into a company needs to feel like a reciprocal investment. So you want to really figure out what are your true value adds and what are your competitive advantages. And then you want to be able to communicate those things in a non-douchey way in all of your interactions, including networking, coffee chats, informational interviews, and interviews themselves. Okay, myth number 6. As long as I get an elite job, I'll never have to worry about job searching again. Again, really embarrassed to say that I had this feeling myself. But the truth is that only 65% of MBAs are satisfied with their careers. This is from a 2016 Alumni Perspectives report. If you read Charles Duhigg's recent article in New York Times, you might think this number is even lower. And indeed, it might be today. But the remaining 35%, it's just not so much, not so happy. But even if you do like your first job post-MBA, the thing you need to understand is that the life of an MBA is about one transition after another. This is a GMAC study from several years ago that indicated that the average MBA has 3 jobs, 3 different jobs, 3 different companies in their first 10 years post-MBA. So it's part of being ambitious. You're always looking for the next thing that's going to take you to where you want to go. In fact, so change is the only constant in life. And of course, most people aren't a huge fan of change. I know for me, change kind of evokes this kind of an emotion. But change is the reason that you want an MBA in the first place. So this is just a little bit of a motivation to take courage, take heart as you go into this process, and recognize that you're likely going to have a life that requires you to always be looking for the next best opportunity. That means that right now you want to take the opportunity of the MBA pivot, not just to find a good job, but to actually develop job searching and transition skills, communication, networking, and really just those two, to learn how to communicate effectively and to build relationships so that whatever opportunities you want in the future can be yours with a lot less drama. All right, the final myth. I have to find my dream job now. I probably should have started with this one. This is really the most important one for you to let go of, because it will totally paralyze you. If you're looking for a job that is based in a certain geography, has a certain kind of task, is in a culture that you really love, has the right benefits package, has a great work-life balance, and doesn't require you to do any kind of work that you don't like, while also challenging you to grow, it's really going to be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Myth 7.5 is I need to worry about work-life balance now. I really think this is a myth. I think work-life balance is something that you sort out 2 to 5 years post-MBA. It's not the thing you want to lead with in your first job. Because again, you're not likely going to find a job that is a perfect match for everything that you want. I like to think that having a great career is a process. Every step gets you closer to being fully happy at work. It's not like this first step is gonna be it. In fact, your dream job, I promise you, doesn't exist. It's not like you're gonna go out there and find it somewhere in the world. You're ultimately going to create it. Maybe it'll be within a company. I'm not saying everyone has to go be an entrepreneur, although many of you will. You can find a role within a company that you then build support around yourself so that you can take more ownership and leadership in the areas that you're passionate about based on your own initiative. So ultimately, your dream job is still a few steps away. It's not going to be your first post-MBA job. I can virtually guarantee you that. It shouldn't be, because even if you love what you're doing in year one, eventually you're going to grow and change and you're going to want new things. That's just human nature. So you don't want to think about this as all or nothing. Instead, you want to think about it as a journey. It might even be a very winding one. It certainly was in my case. And so in your very next step, I recommend that you prioritize your own human capital. In other words, your own learning. I recommend that you target jobs for your first post-MBA job, your internship and your first full-time job, that allow you to learn and grow the most in the dimensions that are important to you. From this perspective, BCG was the perfect job for me because I learned so much in the 2 years that I was a consultant that there's no other way I could have ever learned that much. So think about, what do you need from your post-MBA job to get you closer to your long-term ambitions? This is the filter I recommend you apply to internship and full-time recruiting. Okay, so today we talked about your best strategies, but what about tactics? In an hour-long webinar, and like I said, I'm going to stay and take questions, so I'll finish up here in like 2 or 3 minutes, and then if you want to stick around, I'll answer whatever questions you guys have. So, we couldn't get all the way down to tactics. We talked about how you should be thinking about and approaching the next 6 months to be prepared for recruiting when you get to campus. You know the what you need to do, but what about the how? So I actually have a resource that I want to share with you guys. This is from YOMO. So YOMO stands for You Only MBA Once. And this is my guided course on how to make the most of your MBA career pivot. I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about the course, but what you can do right now is go download the career game plan workbook from YOMO. Go to this URL right here, careerprotocol.com/YOMO. And if you do that, two things will happen. You will almost immediately get an email inviting you to download the career game plan workbook. And there I just put the link in the chat box. So you can click on that there. You'll get the workbook, and then you'll also be put on the VIP wait list for the YOMO course when it opens in the next 6 weeks or so. And here's just some excerpts. So it's, the workbook is some exercises and some questions, some thought-provoking questions to get you really thinking about the dynamics of being happy at work for yourself. It's going to help you put together short-term tactics. So what are the things you need to be doing in the next 6 weeks, in the next 6 months, and in the next year to prepare for the post-MBA goal that you want to have. And then it also gives you the chance to really reflect on the long term so that every step you take is moving you in the right direction. So there's a lot of cool stuff in this workbook. You'll map yourself onto industry and function, and then it's got guidance on how to really drill all the way down, not just to the industry, but to the company, the team, and the job. So go download that right now. And then for those of you who want a little more guidance along these lines, if you want a systematic and really easy to follow process to get through some of the stuff I talked about today and prepare for MBA recruiting, then you probably want to consider taking the YOMO class. Here's some of the questions that the class will help you answer. What jobs should you be targeting post-MBA? How do you keep an open mind while encountering all the options on campus without freaking out? What is the foolproof 2-step process to get any job offer? How to get the job even when you're less qualified than everyone else? And how to research a company in 30 minutes flat while understanding whether or not it fits your values. And then finally, how do you actually stand out in a competitive field, especially when you have a non-traditional or a career-switching background? So YOMO is designed to help you get through all of this stuff. And, this is these are some of the big steps. It's like you're going to explore your experiences and catalog your value adds and strengths. You're going to create a career game plan based on what really matters to you personally, not your parents, not society. It's really focused on you. You're going to develop a decision framework to pursue the right opportunities for you. So, the goal is not to pick one job before you get to campus. It's to have options, but to have a clear framework that allows you to tackle the options without losing your mind. And really importantly, the course also will take you through the process of building real relationships now with firms before you get to campus so that you already have a friend on the inside when you get there. This is perhaps the most valuable part of the course, is that it really brings you through the process of building relationships so that when you get to campus, you're really ready to just rock recruiting. And we use these tools. So these are the skills that you're building through YOMO, and they're durable skills. So of course, the goal of YOMO is to get you ready for recruiting, but in the process, you're also gaining skills that you're going to use for the rest of your career. It's really soft skill focused. Okay, so this is the class. So check it out. Go download the workbook if you haven't already, and definitely consider signing up for the Pre-MBA Networking Festival. Really, really great opportunity to start that relationship building process, to do some research with companies, and to make inroads building relationships. So I filled up the whole hour, but here I am with questions. I will stay as long as I need to answer whatever questions you guys have. So go ahead and type in the chat box, type in the question area. Any questions are permitted. And Ingrid, maybe you can help me. It looks like we don't have any yet, but.
Yeah, no, this is great. I think this gives such a great direction. I do see some attendees that are attending the festival already. So I think this is wonderful that they're getting this jumpstart before they even set foot at NYU Stern. But this is your chance to talk to a career expert, get that additional guidance before you even step foot on campus or come to the festival. and maybe troubleshoot some ideas semi-anonymously. I think that's a big factor to consider in this MBA pool is how do you ask the questions that you don't have answers for in a non-threatening way, knowing that you're surrounded by these also extremely qualified people that have stood out of the poppy field, or the daisy field rather. And this is a way to do it with Angela and at the festival as well, to kind of get your feet wet, answer those questions that you're always afraid to ask. I mean, there's so much information in there that you just think, my God, why is this not discussed more? To be honest, in terms of that recruiting process, in terms of that kind of the stages of your MBA, it is integral. So yeah, great. We have a question from Joseph.
So it looks like he wants a recording.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Joseph,
Absolutely.
a recording will be available. I just put a link in the chat box. So I'm also the official Poets and Quants MBA Career Strategy expert. And if you guys think of a question later and you're thinking, oh crap, I had a question and I didn't get the chance to ask it, you can always go post it on there, and again, anonymously, and I will answer it. Also, if you downloaded the workbook just now, you got an email from the system that goes directly to me. So you can just reply to that email with any questions as well. So, here's a question. Okay, so can you please give advice to applicants who will be in a non-US MBA, who are US citizens, and trying to enter investment banking in New York City? From this specific example, you can extrapolate in general applicants, recruiting. Yeah. So geography is a tricky thing with business schools because some companies recruit globally at any given school. So for example, if you want to go work for McKinsey and you are at Harvard, well, let me use a different school, Booth or Kellogg, you're in Chicago, but you want to go work for the New York office of McKinsey or the London office of McKinsey or the Shanghai office of McKinsey. You can do that because of the way McKinsey recruits. They're recruiting for all their offices from most of the schools that they recruit at. So it kind of depends on where, if you're recruiting at a big company that hires a lot of MBAs and has geographic needs, that's not going to be so hard. So if you're at LBS or you're at INSEAD or you're at ESA, and you want to go back to work in the US and you're recruiting with one of the big consulting firms, that's probably going to work out no problem. Banking is a little bit more geographically constrained because most of the banks are hiring for their New York or London office, and presumably they're going to be looking to hire a little bit more for the London office from the European offices, although with Brexit, who knows, that might change. I don't know how the visas are going to work after Brexit. But in any case, if it's a big company that hires a ton of MBAs, moving geographically, so recruiting on your campus, and then for a position that's in the US or in a different geography, that usually is not a big problem because the companies that hire a ton of MBAs, like Goldman, like Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, those were both on the top list. Their demand for talent is so great that they have to source the talent from everywhere and then bring it to the places where they need it. So that's not going to be necessarily difficult. You need to see which companies recruit on your campus, and then you need to talk directly to career services about what the logistics of that move looks like. In some cases, it'll be easier than others. So almost certainly you're going to have to fly to the geography that you want to work in at some point. You may need to do a trek. You may need to go, at the very least for a final round interview, you may have to fly to that geography. And for those of you who are looking to recruit for non-core companies, so companies that aren't hiring tons of MBAs, they're hiring 1 or 2 or 3 MBAs, and companies that are far outside of the geography of your school, that's a case where you're going to have to do a bit of your own legwork, a bit of your own networking, potentially visiting the companies, campus visits, and company visits and so on. You're going to have to be quite a bit more proactive about building your network and sourcing those opportunities. So it's kind of the same advice I've been giving to all of you guys this whole time, which is you need to take the reins and figure out what you want, and then take the steps to build relationships and make progress towards those goals. And if you have a big geographic move vis-a-vis your school, that just makes that statement all the more important. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay. All right. One more question here. How do I make sure I do not overload myself during my time off pre-MBA? I want to use time wisely, but also give myself a chance to recharge. So this is part of why, not to give a sales pitch here, but this is part of why I created the YOMO course, because left to your own devices, it looks like you have to boil the ocean. It just looks like there's so many different things to do, and it's hard to prioritize. And it's career services. Some schools have a little bit of proactive outreach. Like some schools are going to invite you to do a couple of things that are structured before you get to campus. But most schools just kind of keep you at arm's length and say, hey, we'll talk to you when you get here. So it's hard to really know what the right steps are. And this is ultimately what YOMO is for, is to really tell you exactly what are the things that you really should be doing. And you can pretty much ignore anything else. And the work of YOMO, the class is kind of, it's at your own pace. It's meant to be done over a period of 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And it's not a ton of work. It's 5 or 10 hours a week, maybe, if you're doing everything. So that's probably a good option if you want to try to prioritize your time while still having leeway to relax. But if I had to give you one priority during these next 6 months, it would be to conduct informational interviews. It would be to talk to people who work at the companies that you think you want to work with and who do the kinds of jobs that you think you want to do, and to build relationships with those people based on asking very intelligent questions about what they do, showing curiosity, showing interest in what they do, and then keeping those relationships alive through follow-up. So this is a little bit what I'm going to talk about in the next webinar in 2 weeks, but it's also the entire substance of the homework. It's like the stuff that YOMO is all about. It's about guiding you through the process of really systematically doing the self-awareness, polishing up your communication skills, and then building actual relationships before you get to campus. And then, definitely go to this networking festival. It's a cool thing. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining today. This was really fun. I hope to see many of you in 2 weeks on the networking webinar. And you will hear from me about YOMO if you downloaded the workbook. And I'm only an email away. So best of luck. Congrats to all of you who are into business school. Really great accomplishment.